She squeezed his shoulder. He's gone. Whatever is outside, that's not Jeff. You know that, you know he wouldn't say those things. Lewis nodded and screwed his face up. He glanced at her. The fresh tears welling in his eyes made them sparkle from the landing light above them. And Peroni had to fight the urge to pull him close so they could mourn Jeff's loss together, but that would have to wait for another time. Instead, she just reached forwards and turned off Lewis' radio, which was attached to his belt. All those things. All those things Father Nichols told us. About what Randall is, what he's capable of, Lewis said, fighting more tears. I didn't believe any of it, not really. But Jeff always did. I know, Peroni said softly and rubbed his shoulder reassuringly. But in the end that doesn't matter. You stayed all the same, for us. So did Jeff. Yeah, he replied, his voice hoarse with emotion, and gave he a smile that nearly stuck to his exhausted face, then returned his attention back downstairs. Nichols watched the exchange from the doorway with growing despair. Jeff was surely dead, but far from at rest, thanks to that demon out in the cold who was playing with them, biding his time, no doubt enjoying the grief he was causing. And they were here, in this tomb, and it was all Nichols' fault. He had been so sure of himself and his self-righteous crusade that he had doomed them all to God only knew what fate. What have I done? He whispered and thought of the contingency plan he had stashed away in his room. The box he had so easily borrowed from the Vatican and never truly believed he would need. Was that lunatic course of action really their only hope now? If so, then God help them all. It had been a relatively simple matter to locate the exact whereabouts of the house Larry McCulloch was holed up in, once Israel had made the psychic connection between Whitaker and Larry. Then it had just been a case of following its ethereal trail until it led them to their destination. Randall had been driving across town as Israel directed when quite by accident the demon had picked up young Jeffrey's own trail, crossing their path as they drove to McCulloch's location. The demonic twosome then followed the tendrils of power like some kind of hellish SAT nav to an all-night petrol station where the young man had stopped for gas. Even Randall could see the residual aura on Jeffrey from prolonged exposure to their intended target. It clung to him in orange and gray swirls of vapor, much in the same way the smell of smoke would cling to your clothes long after a night spent drinking in a bar, back in the good old days when you could still actually light up in one without fear of prosecution. Then all it had taken was a quick calculation and Jeffrey's fate was sealed. They could kill the young man, then Randall would use the resurrection charm he was so fond of to bring him kicking and screaming back to half-life. Then Randall would have him drive them all to the safe house and help them gain access with the minimum of fuss before any of the guards would have a chance to wonder how the hell they just went from alive to dead in the blink of a demon's eye. It was a good, if simple plan, but simple would do just fine at this late stage in the game. Randall knew better than to complicate matters with anything more theatrical. He had learnt from bitter experience in the past that you can quite easily overplay things given all the power at your fingertips. So simple it was, for now. Boring, for sure, but there would be time to play with McCulloch once he was in their hands. Then and only then could Randall indulge his more creative side. And it had all very nearly worked too. He had followed the poor sap into the bathroom and snapped his neck before he knew anything about it. Quick, effective, painless. Then he had rustled up a hastily prepared resurrection charm and stuck it to the dead man's forehead. The initial power release which jump-started the man's fading nervous system had blown out the bathroom's windows, but it was late enough that no one noticed or cared. It all worked, well, like a charm. So they had then ditched Fraker's BMW and caught a chauffeur-driven ride with the deceased, but still very animated bodyguard, who much against what little will of his own he had left had dutifully filled Randall in on the security setup they had in place at the house, woefully inadequate as it turned out. Metal shutters on all the downstairs windows, and just 3 guards in total, and one of those a priest, but as misfortune would have it, one of the guards, Lewis, apparently, just happened to be conducting a sweep of the house's perimeter when they turned onto the street and had spotted Randall in the car with Jeffrey, and had as a result dashed back inside and quite literally pulled down his shutters. Normally, this wouldn't have been a problem for a man of Randall's resources, a welcome challenge in fact. They were all trapped in there, McCulloch was definitely with them, and they all had nowhere to run. However, something about the place wasn't quite right. The house itself was ordinary enough, metal shutters and armed occupants aside, but somewhere at its heart, there was power in there. Israel had sensed it first the moment they drove onto the street and now refused to come any further to the house than the front gate. Randall had dismissed this as cowardice until he had joined Jeffrey on the doorstep, and now that he was within touching distance of the house he too could feel a low pulsing energy coming from somewhere inside. It was sufficient to make his head hurt and his skin itch at this distance, but nothing more, so far. But it was more than enough to prick his interest, and as he had never felt anything like it before, it awoke a sense of, if not fear, then certainly caution. Randall turned a demon charm over in his hand, mulling the problem over. He could spark the charm and send it bursting in all teeth and claws to kill everyone except McCulloch. That would be easy enough, but for the nagging doubt gnawing at the back of his mind that whatever was in there radiating that faint but sickeningly real power might be unleashed in full, and Randall didn't like the idea of not knowing what that power might bring with it. He considered this for a moment, then pocketed the charm for now. He glanced across at Jeffrey as the dead man brought the radio back up to his blue lips. "Please," he wheezed. "Help. Me." "Good boy," Randall praised. This wasn't quite as much fun as having his foes inside ripped to shreds by a rampaging demon, but it would have to do for now. And judging by the waves of fear he could feel coming from those inside, it was working a treat. "Keep it up, you're doing great." Having him plead pitifully to those inside through the radio had been a nice piece of improvisation in lieu of bodily dismemberment. Although if they had any brains between them they could just simply turn the radio off. But he knew humans had an irrational attachment to fallen comrades, and he imagined they still held out the vain hope in there that Jeffrey was somehow still savable. "Tell you what," he instructed. "Hammer on the door some more." And the reanimated young bodyguard dutifully obeyed. Randall nodded appreciatively and looked back down the path to where Ishrul was still hovering by the gate. He had let the demon keep its beloved heat haze form as a reward and had promised to let it stay that way for a while, or at least until the collector could think of something more amusing. "Ishrul, come on old man," he called down the path. "You might be of some use over here." "No." Ishrul was adamant. "Can't you feel it?" "It's nothing," Randall lied. "Now come on, if things kick off, you can always hide behind me." Reluctantly, the demon moved closer, muttering under its breath as it floated down the path to where Randall was waiting. Then said louder, "Don't think I won't, either. You're the foot soldier." The heat haze of his body undulated fitfully now he was closer to the house. "There's something in there." "Yes, our target." "No, something else." "Power." "Any idea what it is?" "No." "Could it be a problem?" "I can't tell." Ishrul drifted a little closer to the door and shuddered as if touched by a light breeze. "It's faint, like nothing I've ever come across before, but I can tell you this much, it sickens me." Randall left it too and didn't relish going inside. "Could be nothing," he offered hopefully. "It's weak, might be hidden, but if it is something more, then it could be a problem." Randall finished the sentence for him. Jeffrey slumped against the door like a drunkard, but still managed to keep hammering away. Ishrul gestured to him with a shimmering limb. "This approach isn't going to work." "Maybe. But it's fun and it's scaring them shitless. Can't you feel it? Give it a few hours and you never know, they might be begging us to take McCulloch." "A few hours? What's the rush?" Randall asked. "You're not getting any older." "Neither am I, come to think of it. I insist you do something now. Get me McCulloch and slaughter the others. All this humanity sickens me." Jeffrey was wheezing hard now, trying desperately to fight this nightmare he was in. He took a faltering step back away from the door and made a vain attempt to lift his leaden hand up and rip off the charm stuck to his forehead, but his hand fell away lifelessly. He just about managed to turn stiffly to face his tormentor, his broken neck grinding sickeningly as he did so. "Hell spawn," he choked out. "Sticks and stones," Randall replied. "Randall, now," Ishrul insisted. Randall let out a sigh. "You're no fun at all, Ishrul, you know that?" And with that ripped the charm off Jeffrey's forehead. "Oh, thank God," Jeffrey just managed to say before the unnatural spark behind his eyes vanished and he crumpled to the ground finally, thankfully dead. "Shame," Randall lamented looking down at the corpse. "Waste of a good resurrection that. Could have kept him going for days." "Hey. Remember that guy in New York a few years back?" He smiled at the memory. "Kept him going for over a week. Began to stink up the place though. Good times. Now collector, do something." Okay. Randall rummaged in his coat pocket and took out a mobile phone, then with a wicked grin began to randomly punch in numbers. A mobile phone ring tone went off to the aptly morbid tune of the Death March. Peroni instinctively looked at her phone, but it was quite silent. Besides, who would have a ring tone like that? "Well, is somebody going to answer that or what?" Lewis shouted from the landing. "It isn't mine." "It's not mine, either," Peroni confirmed. "Well, it sure as shit isn't mine," Larry said, remembering his destroyed phone downstairs. He plonked himself down on the bed, making the springs complain at his weight. "It's mine," Nichols said and took his phone out of his pocket. It was ringing all right, but the ring tone wasn't one he had ever had. He looked at the caller ID and couldn't help but smile, albeit grimly. "What's the number?" Peroni asked, seeing Nichols' reaction. 666. Nichols replied and held the phone up for her to see. Jesus, Larry snorted in disgust. Just what I need, another fucking comedian. And the joke's on you, Larry, my boy, he lamented to himself. Nichols hit the answer button. Satan's lapdog, I presume? Ha! Actually, the caller replied. He prefers cats. I take it you are the lead holy man in there? He didn't know what he expected, but the American's voice was so normal Nichols forgot to answer. After all, what, it's not every day you are on the phone to a demon. It wasn't until he caught sight of Peroni and Larry looking at him expectantly that he phased back in again. Is it him? Peroni mouthed and Nichols replied with a nod. Put him on speaker, Father, she added. He nodded again and put the phone on speaker so they could all hear the American. Waste of time asking how you got my number, I suppose. Nichols asked as nonchalantly as he could, although his heart was threatening to burst right out of his chest, and he did his best to keep the tremble building in his stomach out of his voice. It's all smoke and mirrors, Father, Randall replied. Now, I've got another little trick up my sleeve. I want to come up and talk. Just talk, so tell your goons. What are they called? Lewis and Peroni? Peroni shuddered at the mention of her name and Lewis cursed out on the landing. Tell them to watch what they are shooting at, Randall continued through the speaker. They wouldn't want to hit Larry now, would they, in all the confusion? Depends on which one of my goons you asked. Nichols put his hand over the mouthpiece. Heads up, Lewis. Fucking A, came the reply. Hey. Larry interrupted. What the hell are you talking to this guy for? Hang up the fucking phone, you moron. He turned to Peroni. And you, call the fucking cavalry, for Christ's sakes. She held up her phone. No signal, my phone is dead. Shit. Lewis called out. Mine too, I had 3 bars a minute ago. Mine too, said Nichols looking at his phone, not that the demon outside needed a network. He uncovered the mouthpiece again and swallowed hard before asking, where's Jeff? After half a minute of dead air, Randall finally replied. In a better place than any of you.